It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And this week, we are going to be talking ZUFFA Boxing. We are also going to be talking PBC Boxing. We're going to talk a little Top Rank Boxing. We're also going to talk about Jon Jones. We're even going to squeeze in some One Championship. But before we do all that, I would advise you to subscribe, because if you don't have access to all of our content. Half of the show typically gets put behind a paywall, so if you want that bonus content, please let your fingers do the walking and subscribe. Now, John, how the heck are you?
Hoping I survive.
Oh no, what happened?
I don't know if I was eating some almonds, and I think one went down the wrong pipe earlier, and I just been coughing. But I'll live. I drink a lot of water, so hopefully I get through this.
You've got an almond-sized lump in one of your lungs?
Oh my gosh, yes. It's every once in a while a little bit. I have issues. Let's put it that way, and I just 10 good minutes of hacking, but I think I got through it. I think I'll survive.
All right. Well, I guess that's my cue to go ahead and get us rolling. So, first up, announcements came out this week that Canelo versus Crawford has a venue, and it's going to be hosted at Allegiant Stadium. What are your initial thoughts on that? And do you think that they might have some trouble selling out that stadium, considering all of the ice roundups that are happening?
To answer the second part first, I think that's a strong possibility to have trouble selling tickets, because as we look at the FIFA sales right now are pretty low, my understanding is, right? And a big reason, I've taught friends in Europe and stuff, they are afraid to come to America right now because of, not just that they're undocumented immigrants, they would be documented, they would have visas, but just the treatment they hear that foreigners get in the United States by our officials, our authorities, and also just their general distaste with America right now. Now, the Canelo-Crawford fight, you think you'd have less problem with that because it would not be as many international travelers, but Canelo has a big Mexican fan base, so usually you'd expect a number of Mexicans to come to the event. I do not know if they feel as excited to travel to America at this moment, so that will probably hurt, especially when a stadium you're trying to fill up. Also, Mexican Americans might not feel as motivated to travel, even because I have friends out here in California that are American citizens of Central American, some Latin American country, and they're nervous. Some Latin American descent, I should say. They are American citizens born in America, but they are nervous about travel because there's all the horror stories floating around. So, normally I would say, yeah, that's not going to be a problem, but it might make a dent into the sales right now. My initial reaction was I was surprised because there is a college football game originally was scheduled for the day that they're planning to do the match. And so it seemed like it would be an impossibility to put it at that stadium. But I guess you shouldn't put that when you have the TKO's connections through UFC in Vegas thrown with Saudi money. I guess anything's possible.
Do you think Lawrence Epstein being on Allegiant's board played a significant role in securing that stadium?
Well, I would not be surprised if that's the case. If people aren't familiar, Lawrence Epstein is he's an attorney that works with the UFC. I believe his current position is COO. I could be mistaken, but I think that's his current title. I should actually look that up. What is Lawrence Epstein's current title with the UFC? He's moved around a couple times, but he has been with the UFC for years. He worked with Top Rank before. He's one of their major connections to combat, to boxing. And he's been with the UFC since the Tough boom. So he is very, very well connected, very important. And he is officially right now the senior executive vice president and chief operating officer for UFC. So I got part of it right. The CEO. He is the CEO of UFC. And he is really, a lot of people credit him for a lot of the UFC contract designs. I don't know if that's true, but because of his experience in boxing, because of the way the UFC contracts work, a lot of people give him credit for, since he came to the UFC, the changes people have noticed in the UFC contracts from the time he arrived, right after the Tough started and up until Endeavor showed up, those changes, a lot of people credit it with him. Again, I don't know if that's true, but that seems very likely and possible. And he also serves on I think it's called the stadium. He's a board member at the Las Vegas Stadium Authority. He's the vice chairman, actually. So because the city owns the stadium, they have a board that kind of advises them on business practices. I'm sure as the vice chairman, one of the important members of the board, he petitioned that it would be a good move for the board to try to make it so that that the Saudis could have an event, the TKO Boxing, ZUFFA Boxing with the Saudis could have an event in Vegas. So I am sure he played a very key part in getting that. Them to agree to that, along with whatever money maybe the Saudis threw under the table, or I guess the pitch too could possibly be that it's going to bring so many people. The economic impact on the city is worth it to move that game to another night. Sure, there also was some extra money thrown in, and also they're probably pitching to that the people, the Vegas board, that Vegas wants future events. We got to keep the Saudis happy now. So that's a long-winded way to say I am sure he played a key and a very important part. The Fertittas might have also too, because my understanding is they donated a lot to that college. So maybe Epstein's a friend of the Fertittas with Dana White. Maybe they made a call to them, and they made a call to the college and said, hey, considering everything we've given you guys, give the TKO Boxing, ZUFFA Boxing a break here.
Now, along with that announcement, you sort of alluded to it there. TKO announced that their boxing arm will be officially called ZUFFA Boxing. I loved your tweet on this, but I got to get your audio take right now on that.
Well, the lack of originality is what gets me. It reminds me a lot of Elon Musk, who got obsessed with the word X as a company. Back in 2000, when he had a company that PayPal bought, and he jams it into everything now. Everything is X, and that's what ZUFFA Boxing sounds like. Because Dana White promised ZUFFA Boxing would be a thing, that he said, okay, we have to eventually call this promotion ZUFFA Boxing, when to me TKO Boxing just sounded better. It makes more sense. TKO is something that everybody is familiar with boxing, what it is, technical knockout. It makes more sense. I think the other possibility is maybe they just printed a ton of T-shirts back in 2017 when they originally launched the idea of ZUFFA Boxing, and they have warehouses full of them, and they're like, we got to sell this shit. We got to get it to move. We are going to start ZUFFA Boxing and sell it, because it really was disappointing when they talk about TKO Boxing. They announced it's not going to be the name, and they're going to make us wait for the name. And then the name ends up being the company that they've been calling they promised for years, their boxing their promotion. I mean, it wasn't really like a surprise. You could have revealed that back in the very beginning.
It's pretty funny that TKO is the entity, and they're using a name of the former owners.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It's like, again, you're going to make a parent company to a MMA promotion and a pro wrestling company. They use the term that comes from boxing, TKO. So the parent company is a boxing name, but God forbid, we're not going to call the boxing portion of this anything that has to do with anything the common person knows has to do with boxing. We have to use an Italian name, because that's what the original owners of the UFC ZUFFA wanted, because they wanted a name, that another Italian name for their parent company, for the parent entity for the boxing, to be like the parent company Italian name for the UFC, because UFC's parent company back in the day was ZUFFA. I mean, technically they're still ZUFFA because of the lawsuits. They got to kind of keep it. That's the parent entity. And that's why, to keep that theme going, they were like, well, we got to call it ZUFFA Boxing, and which makes no sense. But I guess they have a shit ton of T-shirts they got to unload.
No, they have some plans, and their plans include 12 events with 4 additional tentpole events. Does that sound like a solid business plan considering the talent they've reportedly signed aren't exactly well known?
Well, I mean, it actually sounds like I think it sounds like a pretty good model they want to do if they're just trying to run boxing events. They have 12 events per year. They want to do these not promotion, but development events. They're going to prospects. They're going to development under the TKO UFC model, where they control everything. Okay, that kind of works. And then they're going to have these 4 mega events that break the model that they'll do on behalf of Turki Al-Sheikh and the Saudis. Okay, that kind of works too. What the part that I don't quite understand is how this will be something big in boxing, because the names that they've thrown around are not, they're not the most impressive people. That's kind of mean to say, but they are not the biggest names. Calum Walsh is one of the names that are thrown out. There's a bunch of them that are going to be fighting, I think, this coming up weekend. Who are some of the names? I can't even remember actually all the other people. Roxy, what's her name? Roxy, oh man. Kane Sandoval, I think, is one of them, right?
Yes.
Daniel Barrera, and then Roxy Bird something. I can't remember her name. So they're not like, they're not bad prospects, but they're not, this isn't Boots Ennis when he was coming up, right? And so the part that gets me is like, is this going to be a play for a major TV deal? Because people talk like, oh, this will be they'll offer boxing to get to the $1 billion valuation for their media rights. And I do not understand how anybody would pay a lot of money for these type of these boxing cards. These are the old ShowBox, $400,000 to $600,000 license fee. Maybe they can get more nowadays, but I don't see who would spend millions on this. And then on top of it, there are 4 big events. You can't have a lot of big name boxers signed to your promotion because you can't put them on events like, these cards. And so is the package going to include the 4 tentpole events? I'm not sure yet. So, but on the standard 12 events per year plus 4 big ones sounds like a smart model because you cover every month and then every quarter is your mega event. That sounds smart. What I'm still waiting to see is what type of boxers, events they're going to offer. Where are they going to be offering all these tentpoles? Are they all going to be on Netflix or some going to be pay-per-view? I mean, there's still a lot of questions outstanding right now.
With Netflix becoming, and I quote, the new cable TV, which came from an article, what are the odds that they sign deals with other promotions outside TKO's purview?
Well, my understanding, talking to people, is that the TKO wants exclusivity, even with Netflix. They want, if you sign with us, you can't have another MMA promotion besides UFC. If we go there, if we bring boxing there, we want you to take only our boxing product, our TKO Boxing or ZUFFA Boxing, and maybe the Saudis, right? They want exclusivity. But I also understand that Netflix basically tell them, no, we will not do that. We want these spectacles, and because we want spectacles, we want the right to pick and choose which ones. I think part of that is supposedly that they have, they have a relationship with Jake Paul. He did the first one. He has another event coming up soon with Taylor versus Serrano. He had the massive success with Mike Tyson. And so they understand the type of, potential that Jake Paul can have and potentially other boxers. And so partly, it was suggested to me that TKO did it with sole intent, but one of the reasons they asked for exclusivity is they wanted to deny Jake Paul Netflix because it's such a huge platform. But Netflix at the same time is like, we will not, we're not going to go exclusively with you because some of these events could be massive outside you. So they want to pick and choose. So they're going to ask for exclusivity. Netflix, though, is going to say no. And if other people can offer big fights, I mean, Jake Paul is supposedly in the talks with Usyk. I can't imagine any massive MMA. Well, I guess that is. It's supposed to be a MMA fight, so that would be one massive MMA fight, not boxing that could possibly have on Netflix. But Jake Paul has floated the idea of going against Gervonta Davis. There's a couple other matches. I'm sure there's some potentially big, massive Riyadh season matches in boxing that could potentially get made too that would work on Netflix. So Netflix is this this platform is getting bigger and bigger, and everybody wants to work with them. But I guess the fear a lot of people had is that Netflix would only end up working with TKO because of all their properties. But it sounds like, that thankfully for other promotions, that Netflix is willing to work with whoever they want to.
Well, let's talk about other boxing promotions. How about Top Rank? How are they faring with their ESPN deal pretty much at an end?
Well, they have it. I can't remember. The last card comes up in end of July or in August. I can't remember, but there's a report that came out. I think it was on Boxing Scene, and I don't want to misstate it, but I'm not going to stop the show to look it up. So, people, there's a report out, an article about how it looks like they're going to have a period of probably a month or so where they will not have a broadcast partner. And during that time, they're now looking to loan out a lot of their fighters. They have relationships with a lot of other promotions. And so they're going to loan them out to keep them busy and then pick up a network after that. Now, where they end up with is a good question. No one seems to know. I know that there's a lot of people think they'll end up on Max. I think that's possible. But one problem with Max, my understanding too, is Max does not have a large budget available for boxing right now. A very small budget, actually, a fraction of what ESPN was paying. And so that would not be enough to really satisfy Top Rank. They probably wanted to have a place to have some cards to make up some of the losses they had from, what they lose from ESPN. But it's not going to be close to being a replacement. Other people, thought they'd go to DAZN, but they don't seem to be interested in moving to DAZN. And that doesn't really surprise me because, DAZN, those promoters seem to become dependent on DAZN, right? And so they dictate terms. And also DAZN, I'm sure Top Rank realizes, DAZN is completely takes you out of view of the American audience. And so being on DAZN might get you some money, and maybe they want to give a piece of their operation to DAZN, but they don't want to put everything there because it's behind a paywall that has very few subscribers. And so that will hurt you in the long run even more. So I'm not sure where they end up. There were some rumors that they would go back to ESPN. That doesn't seem likely. I was hoping that would be the case. But right now, they don't seem to have a deal in place. The one that seems most likely to be Max, it does not sound like it's going to be paying a lot. So I guess we'll wait and see what's going to happen on that front.
Now, in our last show, we talked about PBC possibly being in talks with ESPN, and you had an insider track that says that's not the case. More reports keep emerging that PBC is in talks with ESPN. Do you still think those are premature or incorrect?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if they're incorrect. I can only go by my sources, and they're people that should kind of know, and they told me they're very clear that is not true at all. That there's no conversation between PBC and ESPN that they're aware of. This is I'll be honest, my source is not Al Heyman, who's probably the only person that would know for sure. But they told me that is not the case. That they have still a deal with Amazon. That there's no talk of that. I mean, I hope that rumor is real, even though I don't think it is based on what I've been told. But I wish it was real because there was also the rumor that, potentially that both PBC and Top Rank would be signed to ESPN, and part of the deal would be a way to require them to work together. That's a rumor I heard too. And me, that would be great for American boxing, but there does not seem to be any basis in that. I'm not sure what the sources other people have. Maybe they have good sources. I know that I heard those same rumors, but when I called around and tried to investigate, the other sources that were probably much closer told me clearly that it's not the case. So we will wait and see. Maybe I'm being completely lied to, but it does not sound like that's the case.
While we're here at boxing, we've got one more question for you, and that is, what is your one idea that would help boxing promote itself better?
My one idea. Well, this comes from an Adam Abramowitz tweet, X, whatever the hell we call those posts on X. And I gave him my one idea. He had asked, what's the one idea you would use to help to boxing promote itself better? And I got a little bit of discussion on that, but my response to that question from him would be, my hack would be to legally require, technically it'd be just to pass the Professional Boxing Amendment Act. That's the simple thing. But specifically, there's two parts of the Professional Boxing Amendment Act that I think would just incredibly change boxing in a beneficial way. The first is you could write up a template contract between boxers and promoters, and those guidelines in that template would be legally binding. You can write them in a way that you have to have those in any contract that a boxer signs. So then you could put a bunch of stuff into promotional contracts that are beneficial to boxers. We could, a lot of the stuff they've asked for previously in legislation was like a 5-year maximum for promotional contracts. I think that would be great. There's just a bunch of other stuff about, what course of provisions that a promoter cannot deny a boxer an opportunity for a title fight or mandatory. That would be something in the contract, and that would be beneficial to make and that would help boxing because it's easier to make the big fights, and it would prevent fighters from getting trapped with promoters, or the lower end promoters prevent fighters from taking 10-round or 12-round bouts because they do not want to get in a place, which has happened before, where then the Ollie Act kicks in, some of the enforcements of the Ollie Act. So they can keep violating that. So that would be part one, and then part two of it was that the Professional Boxing Amendment Act would have strict guidelines that are enforceable now, not unenforceable as previously, enforceable about sanctioning organizations. And so you could write the guidelines that would dictate, how you have to be in rankings, and you have to follow them, and you have to follow the guidelines for the sanctioning organization. Maybe you dictate that they have to use a third party ranking. And the benefit of that, obviously, is the first is obvious, is that the better fighters, you'd have more legitimate objective rankings. So the legitimate contenders would rise, and champions would be forced to defend against the best challengers, and all that'd be great. But then the side effects probably would be that there'd be a lot of crossover between the sanctioning organizations' rankings. So it would be kind of like what was happening in the 60s and 70s when there was two sanctioning organizations, but often the champions held both titles, and there was such a parallel between their ratings that no one even was aware that there were two titles. They just assume the champion was the universal champion, and you'd kind of get a situation like that in boxing again. Maybe one of the sanctioning organizations would be dropped because, again, you'd have such redundancy with the ratings, or that the boxers could use that fact as leverage, that the rating organizations would have to drastically lower their sanctioning fees, maybe offer more benefits. But the end result, again, would be that you would have a more objective rating. You'd have boxers no longer, the titles would no longer serve as gulfs to keep boxers separated. And these ratings that are more identical would actually not compel, that's the wrong word, you can't make boxers fight, but it would incentivize the top guys fighting each other more, because they no longer would be rated on one ranking, on one sanctioning organization, but not rated high on another one. So you could kind of pick and choose your rating you wanted to go with. Instead, the top guys would be rated on both in an equal position. And so it would almost compel, again, I use compel, but it would incentivize the champs or the top fighters to meet more often. So that would be my one big fix, my one hack. Past that, and I think the second order effects would be tremendous on boxing and improve boxing tremendously.
TKO's announced, and I use this word in real quotes because they have said it numerous times, but their announced takeover of combat sports now includes Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. What do you make of that?
I still question that, because I do not see a big market in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and submission grappling. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't. I see some possibilities. One is they seem to have the second tier of sports they're putting together that they can lump in with a UFC or WWE as a package when they do these site fee deals. So they can promise you a weekend of activity. Now, maybe not every time they can give you UFC and WWE, the two big ones. Maybe in some places they go, we can offer you PBR, or we can offer you slap fighting, or we can offer you now, grappling. So it's not like, the biggest events would obviously be if you had a boxing, a UFC, and a pro wrestling in one weekend. That would probably be the biggest package, but it doesn't make sense. It's probably unlikely. It doesn't make sense to always offer them together. And it seems unlikely you'd be able to, because you're putting those events on the dates that are most lucrative, and it doesn't coincide probably perfectly. But now you can go and we have a WWE event, and we don't have a UFC or a boxing event. We can charge a lot, but we can throw in a a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and a PBR event, professional bull riding. And so that's one part of it. I think it gives them greater, not greater leverage, but it gives them something to offer as part of these package deals. So they can pretend they're giving you a lot more than you are. We're not doing just the one night, it's multiple nights. So these people that come to the site, you're paying this millions of dollars. So when people come to your town, they will hang out the whole weekend and spend more money. I think that's the sales pitch they're going to do. The other part is it gives them more content for Fight Pass. Or content they can package and sell to other media sources. Again, I do not see the draw in submission grappling outside people, combat sports, hardcore enthusiasts. But I could see on Fight Pass it being a package that they're not going to spend a ton. It's 10 to 12 million per year, their total budget, so they can make a bunch of that back on just putting it on Fight Pass. They did offer Craig Jones, for example, for his. To put his submission grappling on Fight Pass at what, $50,000 per event or something like that?
Yeah, but you know what? When you talk about these grappling tournaments not being possibly the draw that everyone thinks they are, I would make a singular exception, and that would be for the Craig Jones Invitationals, because that one that he held last year or at the beginning of this year, the $1 million tournament, it had a huge turnout in the venue itself. It sold a ton of tickets because Craig Jones is a character, and a lot of the people that he selected to compete in that are just world class, and they have some viral moments that are happening. So I kind of, when you told me that they only offered him $50,000, my jaw hit the floor, because he's worth a lot more than that. That whole promotion that he has with Craig Jones Invitational, it's good. And if anything would have a chance at success, it would be that one.
I could see that maybe. I mean, I just don't know how many events per year he plans on doing, Craig Jones. So can you keep the audience every event? Is it once every quarter or something? Almost like,
I think he does them just a couple of times a year, but
yeah. So it's like
only be offered 50 though. Good Lord.
Oh yeah. I mean, the 50,000. That's why Invicta left Fight Pass, because UFC does not offer a lot for these promotions on Fight Pass. They're regional small promotions. They get a lot of them. Well, that's how it keeps them afloat. That's why they serve as feeder organizations for the UFC, but they're not making it. There's no offer outside the UFC that's gonna cover their costs, except for Invicta found a better deal somewhere else. That's where they left. But for him, I think like he does a few events per year. That's like he's doing like his version of a grappling WrestleMania maybe, and that's why there's such a big draw or whatever the other Royal Rumble or whatever whatever events they have for a year, the big ones for pro wrestling. So maybe that's why it does better. I just don't think there's a massive audience for grappling, but there could be a big enough one that it makes some sense. Again, you can put it as part of a package. You can fill up Fight Pass. And the other possibility is that it does take some leverage away from fighters, because grappling is one of the alternatives for a lot of UFC fighters who have black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, engage in grappling. They can go do this. Well, if you're upset with the UFC and you're like, well, I'm going to go do something else because they're not offering me what I want, and the one person running the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu combat sports, the number one grappling organization, is the UFC, your options got a little narrower there, didn't it?
They sure did. I have a side question for you on this. Considering all the antitrust suits, is the UFC, TKO, I won't say the UFC, I'll say TKO, are they playing a dangerous game with all of these takeover conversations and literally doing it?
Well, I mean, not really, because one is that they're not considered the plaintiffs in the antitrust case do not consider these other combat sports as alternatives to the UFC. In other words, they're not surrogates. But athletes, you're an MMA fighter. My cat just hung up on me, muted me for a second there. Look at that. You got them working here. They're not alternatives, surrogates. You can't replace MMA fighter. Cannot suddenly just jump into jiu-jitsu. That's the claim of the plaintiff. So that kind of protects the UFC. They're not considered the same market. They're operating in different markets. Now, that's not to say though, if UFC engages in behavior there's a lot of behavior that you cannot engage in that are just outright violations, like the Clayton Act and stuff. You cannot engage in certain predatory tactics, some of which they did at the UFC. If we have a pattern of that, they start demonstrating that they're doing that to other sports, I think it'd be easier to prove because you could show that they do this time and time again. So I don't think it's a risk per se, because the current suit, they're not linking all these. They're not considered part of the same market. They're not in the same market. So there's not like you're rolling up combat sports is not a market unto itself under these suits. But if you're a pattern of behavior is demonstrated that you do this time and again in different combat sports as you're rolling them up, then it becomes probably easier on the next case to prove that, hey, that's what they're doing right now.
Yeah, because they, are trying to take over slap fighting because it's, remember the big organization was either Russian one or a Polish one, and they've basically wiped them off of the board. And it looks like their intent is to do the same with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I was just thinking along the lines of, well, look at the parent company and how they're collecting organizations. They've done it with Pride. They've done it with Strikeforce. They've done it with WEC. Now they're doing it with Jiu-Jitsu, and they're doing it with slap fighting. I just mean as a way to point and say the same company is doing all of this.
Yeah, I don't think slap fighting will ever become a problem. One is because you said it was Polish and Russian companies. This is North America. So you're in a whole different market. So that protects you. The second thing, it's goddamn slap fighting. I don't think anybody's ever going to care that someone rolled up slap fighting. Good for you, Dana. You roll up the shittiest.
By caring, I just mean as as an example as all.
Yeah. I think the ones that'll come up is if they engage in practices in boxing, because there's a long history, legislative history, court history of monopolizing boxing, that will be easier to demonstrate. Mm-hmm. And in jiu-jitsu, if they engage in the same practices they did with the UFC, that they did with boxing again, that one becomes more likely in the future that something could come up. The wrestling one's hard though, because even though to me it's, we had a whole episode about how the WWF back in the 80s kind of took over wrestling and engaged in all these predatory tactics that are, should be violations of our antitrust laws. The one thing that always saves them is that pro wrestling is worked. It's fake. We go back to the original Department of Justice when they're doing the IBC of New York case for boxing. They were presented a case against NWA Wrestling at the time, National Wrestling Alliance, and they decided not to do it because the matches are fixed or worked. Their show, it just, it did not seem, they did not think it was worthwhile to go after them. They didn't want to get in the practice of going after what they viewed as entertainment. And so pro wrestling has always had this kind of protection because it's not a real sport. Where real sports, you can do restraints on trade by denying people a chance to fight for the title because the title makes you more valuable. It's like, well, the title's completely fake in pro wrestling. Is it a restraint on trade when you deny, someone from, is it a restraint on trade in Hollywood to deny someone a movie role, right? That's kind of the argument. So pro wrestling is the one that it's harder than the other ones to make these antitrust restraint on trade claims that you can in the other sports.
One last question. With Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you mentioned that them having their own makes it narrows the playing field down to, just a few that are worth and competing in. Would it be out of line to suggest that one day down the road they say, hey, you can't compete in any other grappling now that we have grappling? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!